to see all of you. So we started the Gemara yesterday. We're on page 2a of Tractate Sukkah. And the Gemara that we learned, we started with the Mishnah. And we spoke about a number of cases that the laws of Sukkah would basically limit the Sukkah to be in a certain height, a maximum height, a minimum height, a certain amount of schach. The roof has to be a certain amount of how much shade it is providing, and how many walls a sukkah has, and all of these limitations would be qualifying would limit a sukkah and basically create the rules, the laws of when a sukkah is permissible and acceptable and when it's not. What is considered a kosher sukkah? What is considered a non-kosher sukkah? Now, how practical are these laws? Well, a sukkah above 30 feet. In your own house, I don't think it's so practical. I don't think people are building sukkahs. But I will tell you, if you have a magnificent shul and your shul wants to make a nice big sukkah, maybe it would be a little practical. Having a sukkah above 30 feet, people have, nice big sukkahs. So this could be an issue. What about a sukkah on top of a apartment building? Would that be a problem? Would that cause the schach is very high up? So the thing is that obviously is not an issue. Many people do that. Many people, especially people who live in New York or places where they don't have much yard, they only have buildings, and buildings are next door to each other and touching each other sometimes even, and there's no space to put a sukkah below. So we know that a sukkah does work even if it's on top of a building. Now, how does that fit with the law of a sukkah not being more than 40 feet high? These buildings are much higher than 40 feet. So how would a person be allowed to have a sukkah in such an area? So as we saw in the Gemara, that the idea of a sukkah being up to 40 feet had to do with the fact that a sukkah, you need to be able to see. Well, we explained a number of reasons, 3 reasons, but one of them had to do with knowing that you're in a sukkah, meaning that from the floor of the sukkah to the top of the sukkah has that limit, but not that it can't be above the earth, that height, that height. It's from the floor of the sukkah to the top, to the roof of the sukkah. That would be the issue. And if you go through the reasons, so one of the reasons we said had to do with that you're in a sukkah because you can see the roof. That was one reason, and that would make sense, that even a sukkah on top of a building, you're in the sukkah. Another reason is that you have to dwell in the shade of a sukkah, and if it has too big, if the walls are way too high, then you're dwelling more in the shade of the walls. So that also would not be a problem on a sukkah that's on top of a apartment building. And then the third reason that the Gemara gave had to do with building a sukkah very tall would need to be very sturdy. Now, a sukkah on top of a apartment building, it's not, the walls of the sukkah are not that big. They're not 20 amas high. They happen to be in the sky because they're on top of a building, but they don't have to be so sturdy because you're not building this huge building that's 40 feet poles. You're building maybe a 8-foot sukkah. So therefore, all of these reasons according to all the reasons, it would seem that it's absolutely not a problem to build a sukkah on top of an apartment building. And as we know, the many stories of how the government tried to shut down these sukkahs that were built, and then they would give them like an 8-day or 7-day time limit. You got to get it down within the
No, you let the
within
other guy
7 days.
win.
So
You
it
get
ended up that
you let the other
we
guy
always
win.
had some way of getting around it. And of course, this is only an eight day. The sukkah, I can't hear you. Say it again.
I
So
said
the sukkah is
you let the plaintiff win, but you give a 10-day stay on execution. You give,
oh, you're talking
you
the
know,
legal terms.
right, a few days to whatever. So no problem. Do it, give them a
Thank
10
you.
day stay of execution. Done.
Isaac, I think he was so listening to what you were saying, he froze.
He froze. I thought I froze over here.
You froze, Rabbi.
I'm frozen now also, or you can hear me
No,
now?
now you're
Now I'm
good,
good.
but before you were.
Now.
Okay. So let's go over the Gemara from yesterday. I'm gonna pull it up here again. I'll try to share screen. Oh, let's see, because some of you still don't have Gemaras. I made an order of at least one or two Gemaras. I really should order more because some of you, I think, still need a Gemara. But anyway, I have one or two in the mail. So hopefully you should get them shortly. Okay, so let me share screen in the meantime. Safaria. Talmud Sukkah.
Rabbi, you can get, just a reminder to everybody, you can get the Steinsaltz PDF for $10. You go to Koren, Koren,
Yeah,
pub.
sure. So the online version is you could do it free with Safari, or you get Steinsaltz, but people like to have an actual book. At least at least I enjoy an actual book. So I can imagine some of you as well probably. This
My time to study your Shabbos. Shabbos Safaria.
same.
I think he's frozen again.
No, he's off the air.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, Jeffrey. Good to see you.
We have a beautiful spring here in Boston.
Oh, well, it's been beautiful here in South Florida. It's been very breezy in the morning and cool at night as well.
Yeah.
It's gotten to be in the high 80s and even lower 90s, but it's cooled off at the end of the day, which is nice.
Yeah.
Mine said 92 today for a high.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about this technical issues lately. I don't know. I've been coming up with some technical issues. If need be, I do have some other option that they have. They sent me this extra router that expands the bandwidth. So hopefully that'll if I set that up, hopefully that'll help us. Okay. Well, in the meantime, let's see how this goes. If it doesn't work, I'll have to go to the other room. So we said the laws yesterday about a sukkah that's above 20 yamas.
Oh no,
it's an argument for Rabbi Yehuda, and the first opinion says
it's that whole bookcase. You have to go to the other room. You have to schlep that whole bookcase. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then we had the other three cases that if it's too low, it's under 10 tfachim, under 10 handbreadths, or if it doesn't have 3 walls, or it has too much sunlight.
It's not under 10 handbreadths. It's under 7 tfachim. The height of the sukkah cannot be lower than 7 tfachim. It can be. I mean,
so Isaac, I don't know. I'm very happy that we're learning Tractate Sukkah because we're going to brush you up a little on some of these laws. The law of 7 by 7 is the width and the length, but the height is 10 tfachim.
Ah, correct. I'm sorry. Right.
So
correct,
no problem. Just we got to. What you see is we always have to review. You got to constantly review.
Absolutely.
In fact, we were learning in the afternoon class yesterday that there's a medrash that says that every yid, when when Moshe taught the Torah to the Yidden, so all the Yidden heard it 4 times. They heard it from Moshe, they heard it from Aaron, they heard it from Aaron's kids, and then they heard it from the elders. So the Gemara learns from there that you always have to review your stuff 4 times. But then there's another Gemara that says if you want to serve Hashem, you got to review your stuff 101 times. So if you really want to be a servant of Hashem, an Oved Elokim, then you got to really learn. That's 101 times. It's not easy to review until it's coming out of your ears. And but anyway, at least 4 times you always got to review. So the Gemara over here mentioned an issue that it had, that the language seems surprising because the language of our Mishnah is just straight out hustle, invalid. And the language in another Mishnah in Eruvin uses the term yemait, which is giving us a way of rectifying the problem. And it had to do with a mavoi, it had to do with a alleyway that's closed on 3 sides, a main street, which is called a Reshut Harabim, a public thoroughfare. And the law about that mavoi is that biblically you would be allowed to carry from your house into your courtyard and into this alleyway. But rabbinically, there are a few problems. And because of that, you need to make an Eruv. And in addition to making the Eruv is joining by putting together some food and considering it like one domain, like it's a private domain. But in addition to that, you needed to make some type of a heker, some type of a recognition, a mark, or some type of way of closing off that 4th wall. 2 opinions in the Gemara about what the purpose of making that extra beam, putting that beam over that 4th wall that's open to the thoroughfare, in order for that to be considered kosher to carry in on Shabbos. Many big cities have what you call an Eruv. That Eruv that they have, they put a string around the city, and that string doesn't always work. It works in places that are not very busy streets, but extremely busy streets and busy areas are problematic to make an Eruv. That's why in New York, different locations, there's big debates about making these Eruvs, especially when there's very busy streets that you have, that are definitely, leaning towards being considered a public domain. However, in small communities, there's much more room to be lenient. Of course, there's a lot of discussion and laws of Eruv and are complicated, but different opinions about it as well. The trick to getting a Jewish community built is having an Eruv. You have an Eruv, you get people want to move there. you don't have the Eruv, it limits a lot of families from wanting to move there because they don't have this Eruv. Now, what happens when they make this Eruv? They have this string around the city. So it's great. It sounds great, but guess what? There's one additional. In addition to having the string, there's actually they do need to join together with food. And so I remember in Crown Heights, where I lived in a building over there, we used to make what's called an Eruv Chatzeros, that we would be allowed to carry in the building. We couldn't carry outside because there was no Eruv around the city of Crown Heights. But we made an Eruv inside the court, inside the building, in order to be able to carry from one apartment to the public area in the building, which is where we would make the sukkah. There was actually an area in the middle where it was open to the sky. It's a courtyard. And that area, in order to carry there, we would need to make an Eruv. We would join together. We would have a box of matzah every year, and everyone would donate one matzah. And we would have this box of matzah. Someone had to hold it in their apartment. And that box of matzah was the Eruv Chatzeros, was this way of this Eruv for the building in Crown Heights to be able to carry from one apartment to another, or from one apartment to the public area in the middle. And ultimately, that was an Eruv Chatzeros. Here we're talking about a little different. It's called an Eruv Shitufei Mavuos, which is really an alleyway, and it's opened up to the public domain, to real street, major street. And here, the law is that there needs to be a lechi or a koira, which is some type of either a pole that's either horizontal, and it's more like, if it's horizontal, so it sort of goes from that fourth wall that's open, that fourth it's the fourth direction. 3 directions is closed off because it's a dead end. The fourth direction is open to the main street. So there you need this pole, either a vertical, it would be a hecker, recognizable that it's a different domain, or it's
look at it, Rebbe, you think of it either as a barber pole, if you want to think of it, you think of it as a barber shop pole that lets you know it's there, or a cross beam that would say like no admittance or one-way street over the head that lets you know it's there. Those are the 2 ways to really think about it in a modern way. People have to know it was there. That's all.
So that's one idea of hecker. There's another that it actually has like an element of being like a mechitza, almost like a wall to it, and that closes off this alley from being a street to being like a private domain. Now that pole, if it's vertical, it does not have to be in the middle to block people from going. It's on the side of it. It's on the side where the street begins, where right by the beginning. It's on the side. It doesn't have to be in the middle as a blocking. I don't know if people had that idea, but it's on the side of it. That's called a lechi, or a kaira would be this beam that's across. And that beam that's across, our Gemara is comparing that beam to the law of Sukkah, and that beam can't be above 20 amas according to the Tanakama, the first opinion. It has to be 20 amas or below. It can't be above 20 amas. It can't be above this 20 cubits, which is approximately 30 to 40 feet, and it can't be above that. Now, the Gemara's question was, why over there do we say you have to lower it, and here we say it is puzzle, it is simply not invalid. And so the Gemara's answer was that Sukkah, the Gemara gave 2 answers, and the first answer was that Sukkah is biblical, and therefore it says puzzle, and Mavoy is rabbinic, and therefore it says a way of fixing it is lowering it. Now, we explained Rashi's shot yesterday, that Rashi learns that Sukkah is biblical, and because it's biblical, let me mute everyone. Because it's biblical, therefore, it makes sense to say puzzle. It has been established as something that is invalid. It's already established as invalid. It sounds like it's a done deal. Puzzle. It is invalid. When you say Yemayet, lower the law, if we compare that to Mavoy is this alleyway. When we talk about the alleyway, we can't say puzzle it's established is not valid, because we are the rabbis who are making that rule. We could say now it is invalid, but we can't really make it like it's an established rule that it's invalid, because we are initially making that rule now. So therefore, the word puzzle doesn't seem to fit, and therefore it tells us you got to fix it, you got to lower it. Now that was Rashi's interpretation. Now Rashi does seem to say this term called the halacha of Sukkah was given its Sinai, which sounds like a halacha l'maisha Sinai. It sounds like this is like a law that was transmitted at Sinai. And I think Ezra yesterday, maybe Isaac, I think you were both leaning towards understanding this as a typical halacha l'maisha Sinai. I do not believe that that's the meaning here, although I must say Rashi does use some words that might give off that impression. I don't believe that this is a typical halacha l'maisha Sinai, and the reason why I don't believe so is because the Gemara gives reasons. It doesn't make it like this is a set law that is established as if it's a command from Sinai. The understanding of the Gemara brings proofs from Psukim, which is what it means. And so it seems to be understanding it based on deducing it from a verse, not because God said so at Sinai.
What is a typical
halacha l'maisha Sinai would be like, it doesn't say in the Torah to do the Nisoch Hamayim. It doesn't say to pour water on the altar on Sukkot, but we had a revelation. Moshe had a revelation at Sinai. Hashem said, "You know what? In addition to what I wrote in the Torah that you need to pour wine every day on the altar on Sukkot, I want you to pour water also." And so there was a halacha l'maisha Sinai that Nisoch Hamayim is also there's a pouring, there's a water libation on the holiday of Sukkot. On the altar, doesn't say it in the Torah, but I'm giving you this teaching. Now,
and these are during the 40 days.
The Gemara said we have some hints for it, but those were just little hints.
This is during the 40 days after Matan Torah. While Moshe was up on the mountain, that's when he got all these halachas l'Moshe Sinai.
Sometime during that period, right?
Okay.
We don't know what day. Yeah.
So this was different, and therefore, how did Moshe get it?
No, this was not given as a law that is. I'm giving you a rule at Sinai, an absolute rule, but rather I'm teaching you the Torah, and it could be deduced from the Torah that this would be the law, but not like a.
I don't know what deduce means. I don't know what deduce means.
It's founded.
Hashem never said to Moshe, "Sukkah gevaya mi eshemama psula."
So, how exactly Hashem taught all the laws of the Gemara to Moshe? Into what detail they were taught. Possibly Hashem did say that to Moshe, but you wouldn't call it a halacha l'maisha Sinai if it's learned from a pasuk. You would call that a teaching that Hashem taught Moshe, but not a halacha l'maisha Sinai. Halacha l'maisha Sinai, that term generally means that Hashem gives a ruling that's not based in the Torah, but it's just oral. And if something is based in the written Torah, you don't call it a halacha l'maisha Sinai. Of course, Hashem gave the whole Torah to Moshe, and there's definitely understandings that it was even in detail. Hashem gave it to Moshe. There are different ways of understanding it, and there are mefarshim that say such a concept, that it was in detail, to the extent that there's even mefarshim that say that Hashem said that Abaye says this and Rava says that. There is such understanding. But generally, the term halacha Moshe Sinai you would use for cases that there's no reason in Torah, and the Torah itself doesn't have a reason, but it's more like a decree. It's a decree from Hashem. Now, could there be an asmachta? There could such halacha Moshe Sinai, but I don't believe our Gemara is asmachtas. Asmachta means just a hint. It's a hint in the Torah. I don't believe our Gemara is using it as a hint. And the reason I don't believe that is because the Gemara is going to bring halachas based on the logic that we're giving. And it's not just, it's not just saying this is a straight law from Hashem, but rather it's learned from this pasuk. And based on that, there's a difference in the halacha because of the details of how we're learning it from the pasuk. In other words, when you learn it from a pasuk, and the pasuk has certain an understanding of how the pasuk is teaching us this law, so that pasuk, if you're going to follow that logic and you're going to have certain rules and halachas that are based on that, then you don't just say it's a halacha Moshe Sinai. You say it's really learned from that pasuk. So that's why I don't believe so. But I think it's definitely a good thought that maybe this is the meaning here. But I don't believe that that's the meaning. I did not see in the commentaries anyone mentioning that it's a halacha, that's a typical halacha Moshe Sinai. But of course, as you're both saying, it is true that Hashem gave it to Moshe at Sinai. There's no question about it. Everything in Torah is given to Moshe at Har Sinai. Okay,
Rabbi,
so yes.
I heard that someone said that that the Baal Shem Tov said that Chol Yisrael is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. I don't know if that's printed someplace or not.
Yeah, now that sounds very surprising. Are you? Was this a halacha shir? Where did you hear something like this?
I forget the circumstances where I heard this.
So it definitely sounds a little surprising. I don't know, but I've been mistaken in the past, but that definitely does not sound that's more. It sounds more like a joke than some real shit.
Ask your local rabbi.
Okay. All right. So the Gemara then said, now, so I explained the Gemara according to Rashi.
Rabbi, I have a question.
That Rashi makes this difference. Yeah.
So how do you classify oral law?
How do you classify oral law? So oral law
classify it as all halacha leMoshe Sinai, commentary on the actual written law by Hashem to Moshe, which then he transmitted on to us. How do we then classify the entire topic of oral law?
So oral law is basically divided into two things. Number one, it's the Gemara that was not given to be written, and the Gemara, the Medrash, the Mishnayos, all the halacha, all this was only transmitted orally, and the Chumash was transmitted to be written, and this was transmitted to be the oral Torah, which is meant to, of course, explain the written Torah. It's like the code book, which was not meant to be written, but it's it's like codes. You don't write it down. You tell the person this is the code, and then you write down the information with that's coded, and they have to use their knowledge of the code, which is basically the Shleish Esrei Midos Shahatayra Nidreshes Bahem. That's like the code book, and that was not meant to be written. And then you can learn laws from the Torah based on those codes, and that's what Hashem wanted. And Hashem taught it to Moshe, the laws, but he didn't allow it to be written. And the other part of halacha of the oral Torah is straight out halachas that Hashem told Moshe, this is what needs to be done, and that is not, and those are not, in fact, the Rambam says those there's no arguments about. those are when Hashem gave a halacha Moshe Sinai. That's a done deal. There can be no question because those were transmitted very directly and clearly, and there's nothing. There's no way to debate them. The other halachas, there are ways of debating it based on the fact that we're learning it from verses, and it's possible that maybe it's learned from a different verse or it's understood differently, and so on and so forth. So those are the two types of the oral Torah: the way the laws that are learned from verses, and the laws that are just given straight out. But that's basically the oral Torah, and they were not meant to be written down. And we at a certain time in history, the rabbis understood that they wrote it down, but it's meant to be oral.
So, Rabbi, where does the Medrash fit into all of this?
Medrash is the same. Yeah, it's the same thing. That the Medrash was not meant to be written down. These are parts of the story, of the pieces of the pie that were meant to be just transmitted orally. And when the permitted everything to be ultimately written down, and
you don't learn a halacha. You don't learn a halacha from a medrash. You don't even learn halacha from a navi. Everything that we have in halacha is based on the Chamisha Chumshei Torah.
Okay.
No?
We still need to, there's still lessons. So
right.
In other words,
Yes.
Halacha. But anyway,
right.
It needed to be written down. Otherwise, we would have forgotten it. And it gives us an understanding, even though you can't learn a straight out halacha from Midrashim and from Navi, but you do see you do get an understanding of Yiddishkeit and Hashkafa
right.
from these stories. So it needed to be written down. We need it. It's part of Torah. It's part of life. Okay, so getting back to the Gemara here, I was just mentioning that we learned Rashi's shot. Taisvis over here, he says, what does this mean? Sukkah is midaraisa. It uses the word psula, and mavoy is rabbinic. It doesn't use the word psula. It uses the word yemayit. So Taisvis over here says that if it said to lower it, you will get a wrong understanding. Imagine if the Mishnah said, Sukkah that's above 20 amos, what do you need to do? Lower it. Lower your schach, lower the roof. If the Mishnah said that, what would that mean? That maybe preferably you should lower it, but it's okay. It's okay the way it is. Try to lower it next year. You'll lower it a little more if you're able to get your handyman to come. Try to get him. Try to lower. Lowering it sounds like it's minimizing the severity of the situation. It really is kosher, but it's preferable to lower it. So therefore, the Torah, because it's biblical, the Torah has to spell out and say, hustle, invalid. It is not kosher the way it is. And so when it comes to a biblical law, we need to be extra careful. We don't want you to make a mistake. And therefore, it has to spell out, puzzle, it is invalid. When it comes to a rabbinic law, you might make a mistake and say, oh, you have to, you need to lower the beam, the horizontal beam that's on this alley. You might make a mistake and say, oh, I don't really need to lower it. It's kosher the way it is. Preferably, I'll lower it. Maybe you're going to make the same mistake over there. It says by a beam for a mavoy, you need to lower it. And person might over there make a mistake and say, oh, I don't need to really lower it. If I can, I will. I have to try to lower it if it's possible. So maybe you're going to make a mistake over there. And then you're going to end up carrying, and it's going to be carrying in a place where the rabbi said it's prohibited, and you're going to have a problem. So over there, we're not worried that you'll make such a mistake. Why? Because on a rabbinic law, we don't normally make extra laws that we're afraid someone's going to make a mistake. It's like one rabbinic law on another rabbinic law, keeping to add on law on top of laws, fences on top of fences. And so therefore, when it comes to a rabbinic law, we don't have a problem saying the word Yemayed lowered. Person might make a mistake. We're not making an extra decree because someone might make a mistake on this rabbinic law, which itself is not a biblical prohibition. It's only a rabbinic law and its own right. So therefore, that's the difference between the case of Mavoi and the case of Sukkah. The Mavoi, it says you lower it, and there we're not worried you'll make a mistake. Sukkah, we would be worried. It's a biblical law. You need to have a kosher Sukkah. And if you lower it, if it says lower it, you might make a mistake, think it's kosher the way it is. It's just preferable to lower up. No, we can't say lower. We have to say puzzle. It is invalid. Now, this is interestingly says we would like to say Yemayit because it's more refined, but we can't because on a biblical law we can't make such a mistake. We got to say it. We got to spell it out. Biblical law, you don't have the ability to be to choose your to say things in a more pleasant way because this is it's got to be black and white. It's got to be clear. Taisus has another interpretation, and that is,
Rabbi, can't we Sveika on a rabbinical is lekula, Sveika on a biblical is lechumra? Why can't we say that?
Suffix, but not Sveika. Just say suffix. The one suffix on a rabbinic law is lekula. And a suffix on a biblical law is l'chumra, right? So what do you want to say based on that? What you want to say is that...
That's the reason why they use the word puzzle in one case and mimayit in a second.
Because
you're talking biblical law with the sukkah, so therefore, if you have a problem, you have to make sure that people aren't over on an incorrect situation. The same mimayit would mean, okay, so let's say it's a 30 amot. Mimayit could mean, okay, I lower it down to 29. 29 is less, but it's still wrong. And you'd still be over on a biblical mitzvah of building a sukkah. So therefore you say puzzle. Anything above 20 is puzzle.
So I think what you're saying is very similar to the way we explained it, that on rabbinic law, you don't have to be overly cautious of people making mistakes. And you want to say based on the suffix Rabbanan L'Kula law, that would be, it sort of fits with that idea that we're not so worried about a rabbinic law. We're more concerned about biblical laws. So whenever there's a doubt, you always have to be extra careful for a biblical law. But when there's a doubt about rabbinic law, you can be more lenient. Here also, when it comes to clarifying ourselves, we're going to be more careful for a biblical law. We don't have to be so careful to clarify. Is that more or less what you mean? Like the rabbis don't have to be overly careful when they're wording for a rabbinic law because we're not overly concerned. Is that more or less? Not exactly. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if I would say that. I would say the fact that why does he use the term mimayit in one case and puzzle on the other case? I think the fact that you're with a biblical law, you have if you're over on a biblical law, even though if you had used the same terminology that you use for a rabbinic, it would be wrong. Period. You'd be over a positive commandment. So therefore, they don't want you to do that. And that's the reason why they're very black and white to say it's puzzle. Where on a rabbinical, because it doesn't appear, the mavoi, the entire topic of mavoi, the entire topic of Eruvin, other than the topic of Tom, this idea of mavoi, this does not appear. The terminology does not appear in the Chumash. And so therefore it's a rabbinical construct. And because it is a rabbinical construct,
Right.
if you're over on a rabbinical construct, you can actually, that's the reason why the terminology is a little bit softer.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. I'm just wondering, you were emphasizing the fact that Suffolk Drabanan Kula. Now, the reason I tried to reword what you said is because the case that we're talking about is not a Suffolk. The case that we're talking about is you built the sukkah with a schach that's above 20 amas, 25 amas high, or you built the mavoi, and the mavoi, the pole, the beam is 25 amas high. It's too high. You clearly are doing something that's not acceptable, and this is not a suffix. So that's why I was trying to figure out how you can reword your insight and make it work. In other words, it's not a case of suffix here. It's not like the Gemara, the rabbis are saying, we're not sure. So when it comes to this law, we're going to be more strict. When it comes to that law, we're going to be more lenient. No, the rabbis know the law. They're saying that when it comes to sukkah, it is puzzle. When it comes to mavoi, it is also puzzle. Here we're using the word, it's invalid. Here we're using the word lower it. But it's not like there's a suffix here. So that's why I'm trying to reword what you're saying in order to, in other words, the way I explained it was along the lines of the fact that rabbinic laws we could be more lenient with, and the way I explained it was based on the fact that we don't have to be as cautious. It's a rabbinic law on another rabbinic law, and your idea seems to fit with that. But the actual wording of suffix, to me, it didn't. I wasn't able to actually fit into the words.
Then I retract it.
Does that make sense?
I'll retract it. I'm just trying to understand. To me,
so
just never mind, as they say.
Okay, no problem. Now, what you are saying might fit a little of the next answer of Tosfos, but again, it's not exactly suffix drabanan l'kula, but it touches a little on that. What does that mean? It's very interesting. The next answer of Tosfos, he says something very vague. He says that the word yemayit actually implies that it's a rabbinic rule. It's a chumra d'Rabbanan bi'alma. It's a rabbinic rule of the rabbis. I guess rabbinic means rabbis. It's a rabbinic rule. And the word psula is a term that means biblical. Where do you see that in the words? So that is an interesting idea. Possibly, it's not my own insight, but I did hear a shiur where they wanted to explain this Tosfos with another statement, with other laws, comparing it to other laws, where there's a famous explanation of the difference between a rabbinic law and a biblical law. That a rabbinic law is called a prohibition on the person. A biblical law is a prohibition on the item. What does that mean? When you're not allowed to eat milk and meat, so the prohibition of the mixture of milk and meat is a biblical law. That mixture of milk and meat, that cheeseburger, that is intrinsically prohibited. In Kabbalistic terminology, the three impurities, the three levels of impurity are that item is getting its energy from those three klipos hatmeyos. It's essentially treif. It's tamei. This item itself is non-kosher. What happens if you have a chicken cheeseburger? What happens if you would have something that's only rabbinically prohibited, because chicken is a rabbinic law? Rabbinically, you're not allowed to have chicken with cheese. And so if you have a chicken burger, a chicken hot dog with cheese, so what would happen then? That is a prohibition on me to eat it. but the item itself is not intrinsically prohibited. That item itself, according to the Torah, is allowed. You wouldn't be allowed to eat that. I'm not allowed to go and eat it. And so the rabbis prohibit person from the thing, but the rabbis don't have the power to intrinsically connect something and say, you are now getting your energy from the levels of impurity, and you are essentially us. They can prohibit us from doing something, making a fence around the Torah that we shouldn't come to doing this in. So the rabbi said, don't do that, don't do this. They limited the person. But there are, so there's a difference between items that are prohibited biblically and items that are prohibited rabbinically. Now, based on that, the wording of puzzle, that the sukkah is actually puzzle, means that the sukkah is not a kosher sukkah. The sukkah, the essence of this is not our sukkah. That fits with biblical laws. When you talk about a person, oh, I have to do this to it, I have to do that, that's talking on the person, what the person needs to do. So that fits with the idea of a rabbinic law. It's a very interesting idea, and it's used in different areas. For example, the question would be, if I sold you a cheeseburger, okay, and we assumed it was kosher, you ate it for whatever reason, then we found out later that it was actually not soy, it was actually real meat or real chicken. So can you get your money back? Do I have to give you your money back? And this would be a case of a mistake in a sale, some type of a mistaken sale. And would I be obligated to give you your money back? And so there's a difference if it's a rabbinic prohibition, if it's a cheeseburger made out of meat or a cheeseburger made out of chicken. And if it's a biblical prohibition, I have to give you your money back. If it's a rabbinic prohibition, I wouldn't have to give you your money back. Why? Because if it's a rabbinic prohibition, you really didn't do something 100% wrong, because you thought it was kosher, I thought it was kosher, and therefore it's not like you need even to do tshuva, according to at least one view. And when it comes to a biblical law, intrinsically it was prohibited. In other words, if it's a prohibition on you and you didn't know any better, then maybe you don't need to do tshuva. Then essentially trade. So you actually consume something that's 100% trade. If it's you're not allowed to do something, so here you had there was no what were you expected to do? You made a mistake. He made a mistake. But here you ate. So you actually consume real impure things, something that's really treif. When you consumed it, you put it into your body, then you need to do tshuva. Got to get it out of. You got to get the timtum halev, the coarseness of the heart, the Verstopftkeit, the Grubkeit. You have to get it out of you. You need to do tshuva. So that would be a difference between rabbinic law and biblical law, at least according to one view that's mentioned and quoted, discussed. The truth is, this idea is also discussed when it comes to a famous question between on this idea of a rabbinic law. You can be lenient, as Ezra brought up this difference. A rabbinic law, you can be lenient, and on a biblical law, you have to be strict. Now, the question is, the Rambam holds that every rabbinic law, if you transgress a rabbinic law, you're also transgressing a biblical law in Parsha Shoftim, lo yisasar min hadavar. Don't turn from the matter that I have, that the rabbis tell you. So according to the Rambam, whenever you do a rabbinic law prohibition, you're also doing a biblical prohibition. So the question is, if I'm doing a biblical prohibition, I have to be strict on rabbinic laws as well. Right? A big question on the Rambam. This is all the commentaries talk about this. Every rabbinic law is really a biblical law, according to the Rambam. Not everyone agrees with that, but the Rambam holds that way. That every rabbinic law is you're transgressing. The Torah says you have to listen to the rabbis. So if you transgress a rabbinic law, you're transgressing a biblical. Now, if you're transgressing a biblical law, so the question is, so how can I be lenient when I'm not sure about a rabbinic law? How can I be lenient? It's a biblical law. So the simple answer to that question, anyone have any answers? Any thoughts on that? Every rabbinic law is a biblical law. So how can you be lenient for rabbinic laws? So one simple answer to that is that the rabbis only prohibited in a case where you're sure. If you're not sure, the rabbis didn't tell you you have to do it. So every rabbinic law is a biblical law, but in a case where you're not sure, then there's not even a rabbinic law there that you have to follow. Because the rabbis didn't tell you that on a case of unclarity that you have to keep this law. The rabbis clearly said, no, it's only if you're sure of it, that's when you have to keep the law. If you're not sure, then you don't have to follow it. And therefore, in that case, it's not a biblical law. It's not even a rabbinic law. In a case where you're unsure, the rabbis themselves permitted it. And therefore, there's no biblical law there. That's a simple answer. But then there's a deeper answer, and that is based on what we explained over here, that since a rabbinic law is all about you, and a biblical law is about the item, so therefore, when it comes to a biblical law, if you're not sure about it, you got to be strict. When it comes to a rabbinic law, where you're not sure about it, the rabbinic law is all about you doing something rebellious. So if you're not sure about it, it's not an act of rebellion. No, it's not about the item can't go into you. It's about you doing something rebellious. So because of that, there's room to say that the case of question, you don't have to keep it. A case of biblical law, you have to be more careful. You have to be extra strict. You're consuming. You're doing something that's prohibited, intrinsic, essentially prohibited. When it comes to a rabbinic law, you could get there's room to say you're not acting rebellious. You don't know that this is a problem. Therefore, you could be lenient. Anyway, so this is part of the discussion here, and that could be the meaning of Taisvis, the term yemayet and the term puzzle. Could be the difference between a biblical law and rabbinic law based on biblical law having to do with the item and rabbinic law having to do with the prohibition on the person. And then the Gemara gave another explanation, and that is that our Mishnah has a few details to it. It's not just one simple Mishnah. And if the Mishnah had to say you have to do this, like lower the schach, it would also have to say higher the schach in a case where it's too low, and add a wall, and it would have to say add schach if it's too much sunlight. So because the Mishnah has so many details, it's easier just to say, and of course we want to teach in a way that's simple. So the simple teaching of the Mishnah would be puzzle. That would be an easier way of teaching it, and therefore the Mishnah uses the word puzzle. The case in Eruvin is a case where in Eruvin it's a case of where it's a one case Mishnah. So there it's easy to say lower it. It can give you the way of correcting it, of fixing it, and therefore in the case of Eruvin it says you might. In the case of our Mishnah, it would be too complicated. It would be confusing. It would be too many words. Just say it's invalid. So that's the Gemara regarding the difference of style. I will just mention, Taisvis brings down a Mishnah in the Tractate Shabbos, where he says that it talks about Ner Chanukah, that you put above 20 amas. What happens if you put a Ner Chanukah lich above 20 amas? Taisvis says, what does the Mishnah over there say? It says, does it say lower it, or does it say it's puzzle? So the Mishnah over there says that above 20 amas, it says the word puzzle. Now, is Hanukkah biblical or rabbinic?
Rabbinic.
It has to be rabbinic. When did the story of Hanukkah happen? It happened way after the giving of the Torah. It happened during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, when the Greeks took over after the Romans. The Greeks took over after the Babylonians and the Madai, Parasu Madai, the Persians, and the Greeks took over and they conquered the Beis Hamikdash in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it's obviously a rabbinic law, the Ner Chanukah, and yet it says over there, Tractate Shabbos, it says Sula, it's puzzle. So that seems to be a problem. How do you reconcile that with our Gemara? Our Gemara says anything rabbinic, we use the word lower. So why doesn't it just say lower over there? And instead, it says over there, puzzle, invalid.
What is invalid?
If you light the menorah too high.
Ah, okay.
If you light the menorah too high. In fact, the only reason if you're in an apartment building,
yeah,
there would be a problem lighting the menorah too high up, except that if the other building across the street is also that high up, so therefore people will see it, and therefore it's not really a problem. But the idea that a menorah would be too high is a problem. Under normal circumstances, if you have the only high riser and there's no other high riser, no one can see it, and your apartment, no other apartment faces it, and so it's too high up. It's not Persume Nisa, and it would be a problem to light it there. If you're lighting in the window and it's for other people to see, that could be a problem. People don't see when it's so high. So the question is, why does it say puzzle over there? Actually, it's not a Mishnah. I think it must be just a statement. It's not in the Mishnah. It's a statement over there in the Gemara. In the Gemara, it talks about Hanukkah. In fact, there's very few places in the Mishnah where it talks about Hanukkah, and in the Mishnayos, it's one of the big questions in the among us. Why is there no tractate Hanukkah? There's a tractate Purim, there's a tractate Pesach, there's a tractate for Tinios, but why is there no tractate for Hanukkah? One big question. So yeah, so it's in fact when they find the laws of Hanukkah, it's in the Gemara, but not in the Mishnah. Not in the Mishnah doesn't have it. Even when it mentions it once or twice in the Mishnah, it's like on a side thing. You broke somehow the Hanukkah licht caused the fire. It doesn't even talk about the laws of Hanukkah in the Mishnah. It mentions a case where like a side case. So it's not a Mishnah. It's a statement over there in the Gemara. And so the question is, why does he use the word psula? So Taisvis says that, think about the statement. It says it's puzzle like sukkah and like mavui. So it says puzzle because it's comparing it to sukkah. Really, it would say you might lower it, but it only says it because it compares it to sukkah. And sukkah, it says puzzle, so it says invalid. So there also, it uses the word invalid. So Tosfos answers this question that even though it's rabbinic, it should really say lower it, but it does compare it there to a sukkah. So therefore, it makes sense to use the word that the Mishnah uses for sukkah, which is puzzle. It's invalid. And then Tosfos gives another answer, and he says, what would happen if it says lower it? What would you do? You take that lit menorah, and it's in your top, your 30-foot window. And what are you going to do? Lower it to a lower window. What's going to happen? You didn't blow out the candles and relight it. You just lowered it. If you just lowered it, that would be prohibited. So in the case of mavui, you could lower it, no problem. In the case of of Hanukkah, you lit
So-
them in the wrong way. What do you need to do? You got to blow it out and relight it.
Okay.
So if it just said light, it
But
would
I-
give
I
the
told
wrong
them
halacha,
at 11
and therefore
o'clock.
it has to.
So I'll be
That's the answer. That's the answer of Taisvis, that it can't say Yamayit. It has to say, it would have to say puzzle invalid. Because if it said lower it, you would get the wrong impression that you could just lower it. And it's based on a debate over there, but there's the discussion over there in the Tractate Shabbos, which Emir Hashem, if you stay with me for about 49 years, we'll get to Tractate Shabbos, and we'll see it there. Anyway, Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. Same to you.
Okay.
Shabbos, Shabbos.